Do you ever wonder what it feels like to be wanted, really wanted? Because sometimes I forget what that's like. Those words slipped from my lips before I even realized I'd said them, and for a moment, the room felt heavier than it should have. The only sound was the faint clink of plates as I set them on the dining table. My son, Callum, was too busy scrolling through his phone to notice my unintended confession, but his best friend, Rylan, lifted his head. His piercing gray eyes caught mine, studying me in a way that made my pulse quicken. "Are you okay, Mr. Thorne?" Ryland's voice was calm, smooth, yet tinged with genuine concern. I forced a laugh, shaking my head. Of course, just one of those days. One of those days, indeed. Lately, every day felt like a blur of routine and quiet loneliness. At 48, I should have had it all figured out. A steady career, a grown son I was proud of, and a stable life. But stability came with its own price. My marriage to Callum's mother, Maya, had dissolved years ago, leaving behind a void I hadn't figured out how to fill. Rylan had been a fixture in our lives for years, practically a second son. He was a frequent visitor, always polite, always charming. He had this way of making everyone in the room feel noticed, like they mattered. At 23, he was a striking blend of youth and maturity, tall, lean, with a jawline that could cut glass and a perpetual glint of mischief in his eye. Tonight, as he helped Callum set up the living room for their marathon gaming session, I couldn't help but notice how at ease he was in our home. "Dad, can Rylan crash here tonight?" Callum's question broke through my thoughts. "Sure," I replied without hesitation. It wasn't unusual for Rylan to stay over. In fact, he had his own designated spot on the pull-out couch in the den. What was unusual was a slight tension I felt as I glanced at him, a feeling I hadn't allowed myself to acknowledge before. Dinner was unremarkable. Pizza and soda, punctuated by Callum's animated recounting of his day. Rylan chimed in here and there, his laugh rich and deep, but I noticed how his gaze occasionally flickered toward me, lingering a beat too long. I told myself I was imagining it, but the warmth spreading across my chest said otherwise. As the evening wore on, Callum disappeared into the den, headphones clamped over his ears as he lost himself in his game. I stayed in the kitchen, pretending to clean up, though my mind was miles away. When Rylan walked in to grab a drink, I wasn't prepared for the sudden jolt of awareness that his presence brought. "You've been quiet tonight," he said, leaning casually against the counter. "Just tired," I replied, not meeting his eyes. He didn't move, didn't speak for a moment. Then, softly, "You work too hard. You know that? You deserve a break." I finally looked up, surprised by the sincerity in his tone. There was something about the way he said it, like he actually meant it, like he saw me in a way that most people didn't. "Maybe," I said with a small smile. "But that's life, isn't it?" His lips curved into a grin, but his eyes stayed serious. "Doesn't mean it has to be." The moment hung between us, delicate and charged, before he turned and walked back to the den. I exhaled, unaware I'd been holding my breath. Later, as I stood outside on the porch with a cup of tea, the cool night air did little to calm the storm of emotions swirling inside me. It wasn't just Rylan's words that lingered. It was the way he'd said them, the way he looked at me. For years, I'd prided myself on keeping my personal life firmly in check, but tonight, cracks were beginning to show. The house was quiet when I came back inside. Callum had passed out on the couch, and Rylan was nowhere to be seen. I assumed he'd gone to bed, but as I turned off the lights and locked up, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was shifting, that tonight was the start of something I couldn't quite name. As I climbed the stairs, I caught a glimpse of myself in the hallway mirror. There was a flicker of something in my reflection. Hope, fear, maybe both. For years, I'd been treading water. But tonight, For the first time in a long time, I felt like I was standing at the edge of something unknown. And for reasons I couldn't yet explain, I wasn't entirely sure I wanted to step back. I awoke to the faint sound of footsteps in the hallway. The clock on my bedside table glowed 2:13 a.m. For a moment, I stayed still, the kind of stillness where your ears strain for clarity. Maybe it was Callum heading to the kitchen for water, or Ryland checking his phone. Either way, I told myself to ignore it. But then, there was a knock on my bedroom door, soft, hesitant, yet deliberate. "Mr. Thorne, are you awake?" Ryland's voice cut through the silence, low and controlled. But there was something in his tone that made me sit up, heart hammering. "Yes," I replied, my voice barely above a whisper. "Come in." The door creaked open, and there he was, standing in the faint glow of the hallway light. He was shirtless, wearing just a pair of loose sweatpants that hung low on his hips, his lean frame illuminated by the sliver of moonlight filtering through the window. He looked hesitant, but his gaze was locked on mine, unwavering and unreadable. "I couldn't sleep," he said, stepping inside and closing the door behind him. "I've been thinking." "About what?" I asked, my throat dry. He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he moved closer, his bare feet silent against the carpet. When he finally stopped, he was standing at the edge of my bed, close enough for me to see the rise and fall of his chest. "About you," he admitted, his voice almost too quiet to hear. My heart skipped a beat, and I felt a rush of heat that had nothing to do with the warmth of the room. I opened my mouth to respond, to tell him this wasn't appropriate, but the words died on my tongue. There was something in his expression, vulnerability, longing, and a kind of certainty that scared me. "Ryland, you shouldn't—" I began, but he interrupted me. "Don't tell me what I shouldn't feel," he said, his voice firm but not harsh. "I know this isn't normal. I know what people would say if they found out. But I also know I've never looked at anyone the way I look at you. Ryland, I'm twice your age," I countered, but the conviction in my voice was already cracking. "I don't care," he said, his voice steady. "Do you?" His question hung in the air like a challenge, daring me to confront the truth I'd been burying for months. Did I care? I should have. I should have pushed him away, told him to go back to the den and forget this ever happened. But instead, I found myself searching his face, looking for something, an excuse, a reason, or maybe just permission. "You're my son's best friend," I said weakly, grasping at the last thread of logic I could find. "And you're the first person who's ever made me feel this way," he replied, taking another step closer. "Tell me to leave, and I will. But if you don't—" He left the sentence unfinished, his meaning clear. For a moment, time seemed to freeze. The air between us was electric, charged with unspoken possibilities and consequences. My mind raced with reasons to stop this, to send him away, to preserve the fragile normalcy of my life. But my body betrayed me, my heart pounding in a way that felt more alive than I'd been in years. I didn't tell him to leave. He took that as the answer he was waiting for, leaning down slowly, giving me every chance to stop him. When his lips finally met mine, it was like a dam breaking. The kiss was hesitant at first, testing boundaries, but when I didn't pull away, he deepened it, his hands framing my face with a tenderness that disarmed me completely. I felt his weight as he climbed onto the bed, his movements deliberate but unhurried, as if he wanted to savor every second. My hands found their way to his waist, tentative at first, but growing bolder as the heat between us intensified. For the first time in years, I felt seen, not as a father, not as a man nearing 50, but as someone who mattered, someone who was wanted. It was intoxicating, overwhelming, and terrifying all at once. When it was over, we lay in silence, the room thick with the unspoken. Ryland's head rested on my chest, his breathing slow and steady. I stared at the ceiling, my mind a whirlwind of emotions, guilt, exhilaration, and a deep, gnawing fear of what came next. "I should go," he said eventually, his voice barely above a whisper. But neither of us moved. The first rays of dawn crept through the blinds, casting soft streaks of light across the room. I lay there unmoving, my chest still rising and falling beneath the weight of Ryland's head. The calm of the morning felt jarringly at odds with the storm raging in my mind. Every logical part of me screamed that this was wrong, that last night should never have happened. But the warmth of his skin against mine told a different story, one I wasn't sure I had the strength to ignore. He stirred, lifting his head slightly. His gray eyes, soft and searching, met mine. For a moment, neither of us spoke, the silence carrying the weight of everything we couldn't say. "I should go," he murmured, his voice low and rough from sleep. I nodded, but neither of us moved. The air between us felt heavy, thick with the unspoken reality of what we'd done. Eventually, he sat up, running a hand through his tousled hair. I watched as he gathered his shirt and slipped it over his head, the casualness of the act strikingly at odds with the gravity of the situation. Before he left, he turned back to me, hesitation flickering across his face. "Are you okay?" I wanted to laugh at the absurdity of the question, but the concern in his voice stopped me. "I don't know," I admitted. It was the only honest answer I could give. When the door clicked shut behind him, I exhaled a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. The room suddenly felt colder, emptier. I sat there for a moment longer before forcing myself to get up, throwing on a robe and heading downstairs. The scent of coffee greeted me in the kitchen. Callum was already at the table, scrolling through his phone with a plate of toast in front of him. Ryland sat across from him, a mug in hand, looking for all the world like nothing had happened. "Morning, Dad," Callum said without looking up. "Morning," I replied, my voice steadier than I expected. Ryland glanced up at me, his expression unreadable. There was no trace of guilt or discomfort, no sign of the intimacy we'd shared just hours earlier. If anything, he looked composed, calm. I envied him for that. The day passed in a blur of routine. Callum and Ryland spent most of it gaming in the den, their laughter echoing through the house like it always did. I busied myself with chores, anything to keep my mind occupied, but it was impossible to escape the echoes of last night. Every time I caught a glimpse of Ryland, his hand brushing through his hair, the way he leaned back on the couch, I felt a pang of something I couldn't quite name. By the time evening rolled around, I was exhausted, though not from physical labor. My mind felt like it had been running a marathon, every thought circling back to the same question: what now? When Ryland came to say goodbye that evening, Callum was in the kitchen packing up leftover pizza for him. It gave us a brief moment alone by the front door. "Are you okay?" he asked again, his voice soft. "I don't know," I admitted once more. It can't happen again, Ryland." He nodded slowly, but there was a flicker of something in his eyes. Disappointment, maybe, or resignation. "I understand," he said, but the way he looked at me suggested he wasn't entirely convinced. After he left, the house felt quieter than usual, the absence of his presence almost tangible. I sat on the couch, staring at nothing, my mind a whirlwind of conflicting emotions. I thought about Callum, about how much he trusted me, how oblivious he was to the line I had crossed. The guilt was suffocating, but it was tangled with something else. A memory of last night, of Ryland's touch, his words, the way he had looked at me like I was the only person who mattered. The truth was, I didn't know what scared me more, the fact that it had happened, or the fact that part of me didn't regret it. As the night wore on, I found myself staring out the window at the quiet street beyond. The weight of what had happened pressed down on me, heavy and unrelenting. I knew I couldn't undo it, couldn't erase the memory or the emotions that had come with it. But I also knew that I had a choice to make. Either I could bury this, pretend it never happened and try to move forward, or I could let it consume me, unraveling everything I'd built. When I finally went to bed, the house was silent, but my mind was anything but. As I lay there in the darkness, I realized that last night wasn't just a mistake. It was a moment of clarity, a reminder of everything I'd been missing, and that terrified me more than anything else.